Be doing my week one college football rankings. I have Ohio State at number one and Georgia at number two because even though Georgia played Clemson and Ohio State just played Akron, which is a group of five team. I thought before the season began that Ohio State is the best team in the country, and they didn't do anything in that game last Saturday to make me doubt that. They won 52-6, and I know Will Howard had kind of a slow start in the game, but he ended up having a good game, and they had two other wide receivers besides Emeka Ibuka that had a good game. They had Carnell Tate that had a good game, and they had a the five-star freshman wide receiver Jeremiah Smith, who had a really good game. I think he's already one of the Big Ten's best wide receivers, and maybe one of the country's best wide receivers. And Georgia, I haven't changed my thoughts on them really after their blowout win against Clemson. I still think that they're a, a really good elite football team with a really good offense and defense with no weaknesses. And Texas, I've got at number three because even though they just played Colorado State, which is a group of five team. They didn't do anything to make me doubt that they're a top five team. They won 52-0. And the same thing with Ole Miss, who I've got at four. They just played Furman, but winning 76-0. They didn't do anything to make me doubt that they're a top five team, which I thought before the season started that they were a top five team. And Alabama, I've got at number five. So even though Alabama just played Western Kentucky, which is a group of five team, they won 63-0. They looked really good. They didn't do anything to make me doubt that they're a top 10 team. But of course, we'll have to see how they do against Georgia in a couple of weeks to really know for sure how good Alabama is. In Oregon, I dropped to number six because they were maybe the biggest surprise of the whole week. They didn't lose, but they only beat Idaho and FCS team by 10 points. And they only scored 24 points in that game. And it wasn't their quarterback, Dylan Gabriel's fault. He had a really good game throwing for 300 and something yards and completing like 80% of his passes. But their roster is loaded everywhere with elite talent. So I don't know if it is that Oregon is just overrated or it's just that they kind of ignored Idaho because they're just an FCS team and they didn't play very well. I personally still think that Oregon is one of the best teams in the country and that they just had a bad game. But because they haven't proved that yet, I decided to move them down to six when I did have them in the top three before. And USC, I've got at number seven. They had a very impressive win last Sunday over LSU, winning 27-20. Their defense looks to be a whole lot better than it was last year. It looks like Lincoln Riley might actually finally be taking defense seriously because even though LSU does not have the type of offense that they had last year, they still, I think, have a good offense. And to hold them to just 20 points was really good. Now, USC's secondary still looked bad, but their front seven looked so much better than last year, especially their defensive line. They looked really good at stopping the run, and Miller Moss looked like a great replacement for Caleb Williams, throwing for 378 yards in that game. Looks like a Heisman candidate quarterback. The problem, though, with USC looks like their offensive line is still weak. Zachariah Branch has the ability, I think, to be one of the best players in college football if they can get him to play to his ceiling as a wide receiver and as a return specialist. I think he already is the best at return specialist in the country, but if they can get him to play up to his ceiling as a wide receiver, he can also be one of the best at wide receivers in the country. And USC had some other wide receivers that looked really impressive in the game. Hudson and Lane, I think, was the other one's name. And Woody Marks looked decent at running back for them. USC to me looks like a dangerous team this year. Uh, then I've got Penn State at number 8. So after their blowout win over West Virginia, my thoughts on Penn State are that they're probably the same kind of team that they usually are with James Franklin coaching them. A very good team that's going to win a lot of games and probably win all the games that they're supposed to win. But they're probably still not an elite team, and they're probably still going to lose to Ohio State. Number 9, Notre Dame. They look like a really good team in the Texas A&M game. They've still got a really good defense because they held Texas A&M to only 13 points, and even though they only scored 23 points in that game, that actually wasn't bad because Texas A&M, I think, has a really good defense too. I know their roster on defense is loaded full of talent. Notre Dame looks like they're probably going to be good on offense too this year. And I saw most of the fourth quarter of that game, and to me, they looked like a very physical team. Number 10, Utah. Utah, I know, just played an FCS opponent, but they won 49 to nothing. So no reason to not think that they're a really good team. Cameron Rising looked good, throwing for 250 something yards, and tight end Brent Kuthia. It looks like he's still a top 5 tight end in the country. He caught 3 touchdown passes in that game. And then 11, I've got Miami. So because Florida is a terrible team, if Miami had just barely won the game, I'd have said it's too early to know anything really about them. But because they blew them out, I'm confident that Miami is going to have a really good season this year. At number 12, Oklahoma State. So Oklahoma State played South Dakota State, who is a really good team at the FCS level, but still it's an FCS opponent, and they did blow them out, winning 44 to 20, but that still wasn't a huge blowout win. For now, since they didn't look really good, they just looked okay. I'm gonna leave them out of the top 10. We'll have to see what they do against Arkansas Saturday. And then 13, Michigan. Michigan in their opener looked to me about how I thought they would be this year. Their defense is probably going to be really good again, but their offense looked not very good. But of course, we'll have to see how they do against Texas this Saturday to really know uh, about them for sure. And the same for Texas. 14, Oklahoma. Oklahoma overall looked good in their opener against Temple, who I know is just a group of 5 team, but they did win 51 to 3, and their defense looked dominant. Their offensive line, though, looked to be the one concern for them, and I thought that their offensive line would be a concern before the season started, but Jackson Arnold looked pretty good, and that transfer wide receiver, Dion Burks, that looks like he might be one of the SEC's best this season. So Oklahoma didn't do anything in that game to make me doubt them being a top 15 team. And then 15 LSU. So LSU, even though they lost the game, I still think that they're a good team. Their defense looked a lot better. Holding USC to 27, I thought was pretty good. And Garrett Nussmeyer looked really good, uh, throwing for 304 yards in that game. So LSU's secondary it still looked weak, but their defensive line looked a whole lot better. They did a nice job at stopping the run in that game. Uh, 16, I've got Missouri. So Missouri just played an FCS team, but they won 51 to nothing. So no reason to drop them in the rankings or really move them up. Just have to wait until they play a better team to know for sure about them. And then 17 Tennessee. So Tennessee played just Chattanooga, an FCS opponent, but they did put up a whole lot of points. They won 69-3, and their new quarterback, Nico, I'm about to leave you, had a really good game, throwing for 314 yards and completed 70 something percent of his passes, I believe. Right now, Tennessee, I would have to say, is a top 25 team because I thought that before the season, and they didn't do anything to make me think otherwise last Saturday. But of course, we'll know more about them this Saturday when they play NC State. And then Kansas State, I've got at 18. So they just played an FCS team at Tennessee Martin, and they looked okay. They won 41-6. My thoughts on them haven't changed. I still think that they're a good team, but have to see how they do against a decent team to know for sure. And then Texas A&M, I've got at 19. Even though they lost, I still think that they're going to have a pretty good season because that game against Notre Dame, even though they ended up losing by 10, it was a game up until nearly the end. And I still think that Mike Elko is a good coach and that their roster is really good. So number 20, I've got Kansas. They just played an FCS team, but they did win 48-3, and I know their offense is very good. I think right now that they're probably a top 25 team, but can't know for sure until they play somebody better. And then number 21, Louisville. They played an FCS team. They won 62 to nothing. It was Austin P that they beat. And right now, I still think that they're a pretty good team. But like with a lot of these teams, have to see and them play a better team to know for sure. And then number 22, Arizona. Arizona uh, offense looked really good last Saturday. They only played New Mexico, a group of five team, but they scored 61 points. But the problem is their defense looked terrible. They gave up 39 points, which was really bad to give up to a team like that. But Ketaroa McMillan at wide receiver, I think now after last Saturday is probably the best wide receiver in college football. He's for sure going to be a top 10 draft pick. He had a school record of 304 receiving yards last Saturday on 10 catches. So he averaged over 30 yards a catch. An amazing player. And the 23, I've got NC State. They did not look very good in their opener. They just played an FCS team and they only won 38 to 21. That wasn't very good for their defense to give up 20 something to an FCS opponent. But of course, if they do well against Tennessee, my thoughts on them will change. And 24, I've got Boston College. Because they looked good last night against Florida State. They won pretty easily. It wasn't even close, and it could have been a blowout. Boston College was actually being nice to Florida State at the end by just taking a knee and not trying to get another touchdown, or it very likely would have been a blowout. Now, Florida State, I didn't think very much of their loss to Georgia Tech. Was it was really close, and I predicted it to happen. But after this, I think that they're a terrible team, and they're probably going to lose like 6 games this year. But Boston College looked really good at the line of scrimmage in that game last night. And then I've got Iowa at number 25. So they beat an FCS team where they scored 40 points and shut them out. But I think they scored 40 points or something like that against the FCS team last year. And then pretty much every other game they couldn't even score 20 points. So just have to wait and see if their offense is actually any better. But I know that defense is really good. So that will be it with this video. And please subscribe and thanks for watching. And I'll be back in a day or two with a prediction video for the Texas Michigan game.